A gentle rain had been falling all morning, the kind that makes the world look softer around the edges, as if someone had painted the day in watercolors. Maya pulled her thin jacket closer as she stepped into the thrift store, the bell above the door chiming a tired welcome that seemed to echo through decades of similar entrances. She wasn't looking for anything in particular that day. Sometimes the heart just needs to wander among forgotten things, doesn't it? Sometimes we're drawn to places where other people's stories wait in silence, patient as dust motes dancing in afternoon light. The morning had started strangely for Maya. She'd woken from a dream she couldn't quite remember, only the feeling of it lingering like perfume in an empty room. Coffee had tasted different. The newspaper headlines had seemed distant, and even her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like someone else's, someone searching for something she couldn't name. It was the kind of restlessness that makes you put on your coat and walk, even when you don't know where you're going. The store smelled of old books and lavender sachets, of stories left unfinished and memories wrapped in tissue paper. Each aisle held its own microclimate of nostalgia. Here, the metallic scent of vintage jewelry. There, the earthy richness of leather-bound volumes. Maya moved slowly through the narrow pathways, her fingers trailing over vintage scarves that still held the ghost of someone's favorite perfume. Ceramic figurines that once held pride of place on someone's mantelpiece, watching over family dinners and birthday celebrations and quiet Sunday mornings. There's something sacred about these spaces, where pieces of lives find their way into strangers' hands. Every item has a story. The wedding dress that never quite fit right, the coffee mug that survived 1,000 morning rituals, the photograph that someone couldn't bear to throw away, but couldn't bear to keep. Maya had always been sensitive to these invisible histories, feeling the weight of other people's memories clinging to objects like shadows. She passed a section of vintage purses, their leather worn smooth by countless hands searching for keys, for lipstick, for the small treasures that women carry close. Next came a display of men's hats, fedoras and caps that had sheltered faces from rain and sun, that had been tipped in greeting to neighbors, that had been hung on bedroom doors at the end of long days. Each object whispered its story to those who knew how to listen. She almost walked past the coat entirely. It hung at the end of a long rack, unremarkable in its deep navy wool, nestled between a bright red peacoat and a beige trench that had seen better decades. The navy coat was the kind of garment that speaks of practicality rather than fashion, of function over form, of a woman who valued warmth and durability over passing trends. But something made her pause. Perhaps it was the way the afternoon light caught the mother-of-pearl buttons, casting tiny rainbows on the fabric, or how the wool seemed to hold shadows of elegance despite its humble surroundings. Maya lifted the sleeve, feeling the weight of good wool, the kind they don't make anymore. The fabric was dense and soft, woven with care by hands that understood their craft. She could imagine the woman who had worn this coat, someone who walked to work on cold mornings, who pulled it close against winter winds, who slipped her hands into its pockets during difficult conversations. The lining was silk, a gentle dove gray that whispered of better days, of a time when even practical garments were made with hidden beauty. The coat fit her perfectly, falling to just the right length at her nips, the shoulders sitting as if it had been tailored for her frame. As she examined it more closely, adjusting the lapels and testing the weight of the fabric, her hand slipped naturally into the right pocket, and her fingers found something unexpected. Paper. Old paper, folded small and soft with age. She drew it out carefully, this fragment that someone had forgotten, or perhaps hidden away on purpose. The letter was written on cream-colored stationery, the kind with a slight texture that speaks of care taken, of importance placed on the very act of writing. The ink had faded to a warm brown, and the handwriting, the handwriting was exquisite, flowing and feminine. Each letter formed with the deliberate grace of someone who understood that words on paper were gifts to be given with beauty. Maya unfolded it completely, standing there among the forgotten coats and the scent of yesterday, and began to read. The words seemed to shimmer on the page, as if they carried their own light. Asterisk, my dearest heart, The lilacs are blooming again, and I think of you with every breath of their sweetness. How strange it is that beauty can make the heart ache so. I find myself walking past your street each morning, hoping for just a glimpse of you in the window, knowing I have no right to such hope. Yesterday, I saw you at the market, choosing apples with such careful attention, and I want to tell you that you looked beautiful in that blue dress, the one that matches your eyes. But I could only watch from behind the newspaper stand, memorizing the way you held each apple to the light, the way you smiled at Mrs. Henderson when she asked about your garden. I've been reading Dickinson again, the poems you shared with me last spring. I dwell in possibility, she wrote, and I understand now what she meant. With you, I dwell in possibility too. The possibility of mornings that begin with your voice, of evenings that end with your laughter, of a life lived honestly instead of in shadow. Asterisk. The letter went on, speaking of stolen moments and a love that dared not speak its name in daylight. There were references to shared books, to conversations held in shadows, to promises that could never be kept in the world they inhabited. The writer described secret meetings in the library after closing time, hands touching over the same page, whispered conversations between the stacks where no one else could hear. She wrote about the agony of pretending to be merely friends, of having to discuss other men as potential suitors when her heart belonged entirely elsewhere. And then, near the end, a single line that made Maya's breath catch. Leo, if things were different, if we lived in a world where love was simply love, regardless of what others might think, I would shout my devotion from every rooftop. Instead, I write these words that will never find you, loving you in secret as if secrecy could make love less real. The letter was unsigned. No date, no address. Just this achingly beautiful confession that had lived in darkness for who knew how many years, waiting in the pocket of a navy wool coat for someone to find it. Maya stood there for a long time, reading and rereading those faded words, each sentence revealing new layers of meaning. Customers moved around her like ghosts. The cash register chimed its electronic song. Conversations flowed in gentle murmurs, but she existed in a bubble of quiet wonder, transported to another time, another woman's heart. Who was Leo? Who had written these words with such tender desperation? And why had the letter never been sent? The question followed her as she waited in line to pay, the letter carefully refolded in her trembling hands. She found herself studying the other customers, wondering about their own secrets, their own unspoken loves. The elderly man buying a vintage tie. Had he written letters like this to someone who never knew? The young mother with her toddler, examining children's books. Would she someday have secrets of her own to keep? Mrs. Chun, the woman behind the counter, noticed Maya's preoccupied state as she rang up the coat. "You look like you've seen a ghost, dear," she said kindly. "Maybe I have," Maya murmured, then shook her head with a small smile. "I found something unexpected in the pocket. Just someone's old letter." Mrs. Chin's weathered face softened with understanding. "Ah, the stories these old things could tell. Sometimes I think they find their way to the right people at the right time. Don't you think?" She bought the coat, of course. How could she not? At home, she cleared her kitchen table with reverent care, moving aside the morning's newspaper and her half-finished crossword puzzle. She spread the letter carefully on the clean surface, studying every curve of ink, every faded flourish. The paper was old, decades old by the look of it. The language had a formality that belonged to another era, when letters were events and words were chosen with infinite care, when people wrote by hand and meant every carefully chosen phrase. Maya found herself imagining the woman who had penned these words. She could see her clearly somehow, sitting at a wooden desk by lamplight, perhaps choosing each word like a prayer, crossing out lines that revealed too much, starting over when emotion made her handwriting tremble. Did she live alone? Did she have a cat that curled up beside her while she wrote? Did she cry as she folded the letter, knowing it would never be sent? The cream-colored stationery had a watermark, barely visible but still there. A delicate rose pattern that spoke of quality, of someone who believed that even private emotions deserved beautiful paper. Maya held it up to the window, watching afternoon light illuminate the embedded design. This wasn't casual correspondence. This was a love letter in every sense of the word. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She found herself standing at her window, looking out at the city lights and wondering about the woman who had poured her heart onto that cream-colored paper. What had it cost her to love someone she couldn't openly claim? What had it cost her to never send those words? The next morning brought sunshine and resolve, but also a strange nervousness that Maya couldn't shake. She'd had dreams all night, fragments of images that felt more like memories than imagination. A woman in a blue dress choosing apples, hands touching over an open book. The scent of lilacs, so real she'd woken up looking for the source. Maya had never been one to leave mysteries unsolved, and this one felt different somehow. Personal, as if finding the letter had made her responsible for its story, its writer, its intended recipient. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothes that felt respectful of the gravity of her mission. The navy coat, of course, it seemed only right that it should be part of this journey. As she walked to the thrift store, she noticed things differently. The way morning light caught in windows. The elderly woman tending her garden, her movements careful and deliberate. The way strangers' eyes held stories she would never know. The letter had awakened something in her, a heightened awareness of the secret lives lived all around her. She started with the thrift store, of course. The elderly woman behind the counter, Mrs. Chun, her name tag read, looked at the letter with kind eyes but shook her head. So many donations come through here, dear. People cleaning out estates, family members who don't know what to do with the past. This coat, it came in last week, I think, with a whole bunch of things from an estate sale. An estate sale. Maya felt her heart quicken. Do you remember which one? Mrs. Chin's weathered hands shuffled through a box of receipts. Here it is. The Morrison estate on Elm Street. Sweet old lady lived there for 60 years. Her great-niece handled the sale. Elm Street was lined with maple trees that had stood witness to generations of secrets, their thick trunks and spreading branches holding decades of whispered conversations, stolen glances, hearts breaking and mending under their shade. The houses were old and gracious, built in an era when front porches were for socializing and back gardens were for solitude, the kind where people lived entire lives, where children were born and grew up and moved away, where love stories played out behind lace curtains and rose gardens. Maya walked slowly down the sidewalk, trying to imagine this street in the 1950s or 60s. She could picture it somehow. Women in house dresses hanging laundry on lines, children playing hopscotch on the sidewalk, the postman making his rounds with letters that might change lives. Had Ellen walked this same path, her heart racing as she passed Leo's house? Had she lingered at the corner, hoping for a glimpse of her beloved at a window? The Morrison house stood empty now, a sold sign swaying gently in the front yard. But Maya could see traces of its former life. The careful landscaping, now overgrown, that spoke of someone who had loved this place. Rose bushes that had been tended for decades. A porch swing that had hosted countless quiet evenings. Windows that had framed a lifetime of watching the seasons change. The Morrison house stood empty now, a sold sign swaying gently in the front yard. But neighbors, Maya had learned, were repositories of memory, living libraries of the small details that make up a life. She knocked on the door next to the Morrison place, her heart beating faster than seemed reasonable. An elderly man answered, his face deeply lined but kind, eyes bright with the particular alertness of someone who had spent decades paying attention to the rhythms of a street. "Oh, you're asking about Ellen Morrison," he said when Maya explained her quest, his voice warming with recognition. "Now, there's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in months. Lovely woman, kept to herself mostly, but always had a kind word when you passed her garden. Never married, you know. There were whispers years ago, but then small towns always whisper, don't they? Especially about women who choose to live differently." He invited Maya in for tea, and as they sat in his sun-filled kitchen, walls covered with photographs of grandchildren and decades of Christmas mornings, he told her what he remembered. His hands wrapped around his mug, as if drawing warmth from more than just the tea. I lived next to Ellen for 35 years, he said. Watched her plant that garden, watched her tend it through every season. She had a gift with growing things. But more than that, she had a gentleness about her that drew people. Children weren't afraid of her like they were of some of the other spinster ladies on the street. She'd give them books to read, help them with their homework when their parents were working. Ellen was a teacher for 40 years at the elementary school downtown. Loved literature, loved books more than most people love anything. I used to see her in her garden sometimes, especially on Sunday mornings, reading poetry aloud to her roses. Thought it was charming, really. She said plants needed beauty as much as water and sunlight. Maybe she was right. Her garden was always the most beautiful on the street. He paused, his eyes growing distant with memory. She had a friend. Oh, this must have been in the 50s or early 60s, a woman named Leo. Well, Leonora. Actually, but Ellen always called her Leo. Pretty girl, with dark hair and eyes that reminded you of still water. She worked at the bank downtown, I think. Professional woman, which was unusual in those days. Maya's cup trembled in her hands. Now, here was Leo, not just a name on a letter, but a real person with dark hair and still water eyes. They were inseparable for a few years, the neighbor continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who had told this story to himself many times over the years. Always together, walking to the library every Thursday evening, sharing books back and forth, sitting on Ellen's porch swing until well after dark. You'd see them with their heads bent together over some novel or book of poetry, completely absorbed in whatever they were discussing. People talked, of course. Two unmarried women spending so much time together, but they were discreet. Had to be in those days. The world wasn't kind to women who loved differently. Maya asked what had happened to them, to their friendship, though she could already feel the shape of heartbreak in the air. The old man's face grew sad, the lines around his eyes deepening with remembered sorrow. Leo got married, to a man her family chose for her. That's how it was done then, especially for girls from traditional families. I remember the day she came to tell Ellen. I was working in my yard and you could hear the grief in both their voices, even though they were trying to keep it quiet. She moved away after the wedding, somewhere out west, I think. Nevada or California. One of those places where you go to disappear. He set down his cup and stared out the window toward Ellen's former house. I never saw Leo again after that, but I noticed things. Ellen kept fresh flowers on her porch for years afterward. White roses. Every single week, white roses, even in winter when she had to drive clear across town to find them at the greenhouse. And she never seemed to look at anyone else the way she'd looked at Leo. Not once in all the years I knew her. Maya left that house with her heart heavy and full at the same time, carrying the weight of a love story that had been hidden for decades. She was beginning to understand the true cost of the letter in her purse, the depth of sacrifice it represented. But she still didn't know where Leonora, had gone, or if she was even still alive. The trail had gone cold in the 1960s, and 60 years was a long time for a heart to keep beating. As she walked back to her car, Maya noticed a woman across the street tending her flower bed. On impulse, she crossed over and introduced herself, explaining that she was researching the Morrison family history. The woman straightened, brushing soil from her hands. Ellen Morrison? Oh, I remember her. Sweet woman. I was just a child then, but she used to give me books to read. My mother was friends with her. They were both teachers. Mom might remember more about that friend of hers, the one who moved away. She's in a nursing home now, but her memory's still sharp for the old days. The trail led her to the local library next, a Carnegie building with stone lions guarding its entrance and tall windows that had watched generations of readers discover new worlds. Ellen Morrison had worked here for decades, and Maya hoped that somewhere in its careful records, she might find another piece of the puzzle. The head librarian, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, remembered Ellen well. She led Maya to a quiet corner of the reference section, where afternoon light painted patterns on the wooden tables. She was extraordinary, the librarian said, pulling out an old staff photograph from 1963. Look, there she is. Maya found herself looking at a woman with intelligent eyes and a soft smile, surrounded by books and possibility. Ellen Morrison at 30-something, young and vibrant and full of unspoken longing. She was beautiful in a quiet way, the kind of beauty that revealed itself slowly, that deepened the more you looked. She never talked about her personal life much, the librarian continued, settling into the chair beside Maya, but she did keep a box of personal things in her desk. After she passed, her great-niece went through everything. Most of it went to the family, but she did donate some items to the Historical Society, papers, letters, things she thought might be of interest to local historians. Maya's pulse quickened. Letters, quite a few actually, all tied up with ribbon, the way ladies used to keep their correspondence. The great-niece said she couldn't bear to throw them away, but she didn't know what to do with them either. Sometimes that's the kindest thing to do with other people's secrets. Pass them along to strangers who might understand their value. The Historical Society occupied a Victorian house on the edge of downtown, its rooms filled with photographs and documents and the careful preservation of memory. Lace curtains filtered the afternoon light, and the air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Maya explained her quest to the volunteer coordinator, a woman who looked like she'd been born to tend archives, showing her the letter with careful reverence. "Oh my," the woman breathed, adjusting her reading glasses to examine the faded ink. "This is beautiful. And you found it in a coat from the Morrison estate." She disappeared into the back room, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, and returned with a small cardboard box that looked like it had been waiting decades for the right person to claim it. "This came to us from the same estate. Letters, mostly. Personal correspondence. The family didn't know what to do with them. They felt too private to display, but too precious to discard." Maya's hand shook as she opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters, all in the same flowing handwriting, all addressed to my dearest Leo. Each one was folded with the same careful precision, each one tied with a faded blue ribbon that had once been bright as summer sky. None of them had ever been sent. They were love letters spanning decades, from the passionate confusion of first love to the gentle melancholy of middle age to the resigned wisdom of later years. Ellen Morrison had written to Leo for 40 years, pouring her heart onto paper, never sending a single letter. Maya lifted them carefully, feeling the weight of accumulated longing, decades of devotion preserved in secret. The early letters were breathless with discovery, full of the wonder of finding someone who understood her thoughts before she spoke them. The middle years carried the ache of separation, news of life continuing without the one person who mattered most. The later letters held a different kind of beauty, the peace of a love that had outlasted youth, that had become as much a part of her as breathing. "I saw you today," read one from what must have been the 1970s, "at the grocery store with your daughter. She has your eyes, your smile." I stayed hidden behind the cereal aisle like a teenager with a crush, but I couldn't help but feel proud, as if I had some small claim to the woman who raised such a confident, beautiful child. Among the letters was an address book, old and worn. Maya found it easily. Leonora Davies, with an address that had been crossed out and rewritten several times over the years. The last entry was in a different handwriting, shaky with age. Sunset Manor, room 237. Sunset Manor was a gentle place, filled with afternoon light and the quiet dignity of lives well lived. Maya found Leonora in the garden, a tiny woman with white hair and eyes that still held traces of the beauty that had once made Ellen Morrison's heart skip. "Excuse me," Maya said softly, settling on the bench beside her. "Are you Leonora Davies? Did you once know a woman named Ellen Morrison?" The old woman's face transformed, years falling away in an instant. "Ellen," she whispered. "Oh, my dear Ellen. How do you know that name?" Maya told her story carefully, gently, watching emotions play across Leonora's face like sunlight through leaves. When she showed her the letter, Leonora began to cry. Not the harsh tears of grief, but the soft weeping of recognition. "She kept writing to me," Leonora said, her voice barely audible. "All these years, and she kept writing to me." "You knew." Leonora smiled through her tears. Every week, white roses appeared on my doorstep. No note, no signature, but I knew. Even after I moved across the country, even after I remarried when my husband died, the roses found me. Elenesh Roshesh. She told Maya the story then, how they'd fallen in love in 1952, two young women in a world that had no place for their kind of love. How Leonora's family had discovered their letters and forced her into marriage with a man she barely knew. How she'd spent 60 years wondering if Ellen had forgotten her, if their love had been real or just a dream of youth. I wrote to her too, Leonora confessed. For years, I wrote letters I never sent. I kept them in a hat box in my closet next to my wedding dress. My daughter found them after I moved here. She threw them away. The old woman's voice broke. She thought they were just remnants of confusion. Maya stayed with Leonora for 3 hours that day, sharing the contents of Ellen's letterbox, watching this gentle woman read 40 years of love letters she'd never known existed. They were letters about ordinary days made sacred by longing, about books and music and the changing seasons, about growing old while keeping love alive in secret. As the sun began to set, Maya made a decision that surprised even her. She gathered all the letters, both Ellen's unsent words and the one she'd found in the coat pocket, and placed them carefully in Leonora's hands. "These belong to you," she said simply. "They always did." Leonora clutched the letters to her chest, and for a moment Maya could see the young woman she'd once been, the one who'd walked with Ellen Morrison through gardens and library stacks, sharing dreams in whispered conversations. "Thank you," Leonora said, her voice steady now. "Thank you for bringing my Ellen back to me." Maya drove home that evening through streets painted gold by the setting sun. She still had the navy coat. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. But something had changed in her, something subtle and profound. She'd always believed in love, of course, but she'd thought of it as something that happened to other people, something that required the right timing and circumstances and a dozen small miracles aligning, just so. Finding Ellen and Leo's story had taught her something different. Love wasn't about finding the perfect moment or the perfect person. Love was about choosing to write letters you might never send, about keeping someone's memory alive with weekly roses, about holding tenderness for 40 years and calling it hope. That night, Maya sat at her kitchen table with good paper and a fountain pen. She thought about her own unspoken words, her own unsent letters, the dreams she'd kept carefully locked away for fear they might not be returned. And for the first time in years, she began to write. Outside her window, the city hummed its eternal song of possibility. Somewhere in that urban symphony, other people were writing their own unsent letters, keeping their own vigils, tending their own secret gardens of love. But some secrets, Maya had learned, are meant to be shared. Some letters are meant to find their way home. And sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply putting words on paper and trusting that love, in all its forms, will find a way to reach the hearts that need it most. The navy wool coat hangs in Maya's closet now, its pockets empty but not forgotten. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings when the light falls just right, she puts it on and walks through the city, looking for other stories waiting to be found, other letters waiting to be delivered home. After all, she'd learned that some of the most important journeys begin with a single folded paper and the courage to care about strangers' hearts. She'd learned that love letters never really age. They just wait, patient and faithful as roses blooming year after year, knowing that somewhere, someone remembers, someone still cares, someone is still writing their name in the margins of their dreams. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.